Hello, everyone. Today we'll continue talking about Bomarito's cool book on Buddhism. So let us begin. So we'll talk about karma and the way in which karma relates to selflessness. So karma is one of those notions that has infiltrated the Western culture. It's part of the vocabulary that we use, but many times it's distorted. This is not quite faithful to, though sometimes it is, it's faithful to the way in which it originated in Buddhist context. And in fact, the notion itself is taken from a prior Hinduist context from which, the Buddhist tradition itself emerges. But the dominant way of thinking about karma in Hindu and the subsequent Buddhist thinking is something like the following. We should not think of karma as something like a cosmic justice in the kind of Western way of thinking about that. So it's not like a being that is there watching what you do, and then if you do something right, it rewards you for it, and if you do something wrong, it punishes you for it. So in the West, many people have the conception of right and wrong in terms of this model of like the police officer. There's this law: do not go over 65 miles per hour. And the law is there imposed from without, right? There's this authority figure, the legislator, that made it for other people, like the drivers. But there's really nothing like intrinsic about the road or the cars. I mean, at some point, if you keep going fast enough, it'll be dangerous. If you're going slow enough, you'll be an obstacle for others. So there's some like objective factors that kind of mm, delineate or limit the quantity of available things that the legislator can make. But still, at the end of the day, it is grounded in the authority of the legislator. The authority said 65. It could have said 67, 60, 70. In fact, it varies throughout different parts of the US, for example. But anyway, the model of justice or rightness or doing the right thing is one in which there's some agent that has authority that is external to those that are acting in the world, and that imposes a rule. And now there's this imposition from without. And now there's this police officer that if you go, too fast, they catch you and give you a ticket, right? So there is the imposition of the law from without. What you ought to do, what you should do, is something that is imposed, and then there are punishments and rewards as ways of motivating you to do the thing that you ought to do, which is different than what you're actually doing. um, that's not at all what's happening in the karma model. The karma model is supposed to be a mere description of the way in which things work. So it's something like the law of cause and effect. It's not a description of how things ought to be, how they should be, but rather the way things are. And for Buddhists, that way things are applies to physical things. Like if you drop an object, it falls, right? It naturally falls. That's the effect of the cause of letting go of an object, at least within another object of strong gravitational pull. But anyway, there's the like purely physical stuff. And for Buddhists, things that we tend to think as moral, like virtue, vice, and things like that, being selfless, being selfish, are also to kind of part of the domain or part of the proper object of the law of karma. But it's just a description of cause and effect. So, for example, if you eat a lot of carbs and a lot of sugar, you will naturally gain weight. That just is the natural effect of putting a lot of carbs and sugar onto your body. That's how the body is structured. And there's no like punishment. It's not that you're being punished for indulging in so much eating. So gaining a lot of weight is not a punishment for your kind of like sin of being a glutton, right? Eating too much. That's not how you should think about karma. Karma just says, causes have effects. Your body's structured in a particular way. If you eat a lot of carbs and a lot of sugar, you will gain weight. That's just what happens. And it applies across the board. If you start acting selflessly, you become selfish, and then other people around you don't like you because people that are selfish are not likable. And if you start being kind and benevolent towards others, you will become kind and they will like you because kindness is likable, right? Like things like that. That's just how the world is, right? So karma describes the causes and effects that involve moral notions, but it just lays out how things are. It's not a rule imposed from without about how you ought to behave. It's just describing what would happen if you act in one way or another. So that's the basic description. Um, and a lot of thinkers, including a lot of Buddhist thinkers, make a distinction between actions that we do and things that happen to us. So a lot of things happen to us. Sometimes we trip, but it's not like we caused the act of falling, right? It happened to us. Like we're not the agents, we're not the source of those things. They happen to us. Uh, in what matters for karma is the things that everything is governed by karma, but what matters with karma for the moral categories are the things we do. And the things we do are our actions, and they're grounded in intention. So intention plays a crucial role in identifying not merely whether the action we do is moral or immoral, but what it is that we're doing. The very identification of what the action that we're doing depends upon the intention. And here's an example that Porimato uses in the book. So think of someone going to get the stuff from an ex after a break, right? That's the physical thing. They're driving the car, they're driving towards the ex, they're going to pick up some of their stuff after they broke up. But that's too general, right? The particular action can still be one of multiple ones depending on the intention of the person. So what their goal is, or their intention, determines what exactly they're actually doing, their action. Are they trying to get their stuff back? If that's what they're just going there to get their stuff back, then that's the action they're doing. Are they trying to reconcile? That is, they're using the excuse of picking up their stuff to get in touch with their ex and trying to be kind to them, be nice, and like try to flirt again and trying to like rekindle the romance. Is that what they're doing? Notice that that's a different action. Are they trying to inconvenience the ex in a final act of retribution? They want to show up because they're annoyed at them, and like their presence will make them even more upset, and that's a way of like getting back at them one last time. That's a radically different kind of action. So what are they doing as they're driving back to their ex places to get stuff after a breakup? Actually, what they're doing depends upon the intention, not just what's happening at the outside, at least at this stage of the description. So the intention of the agent settles the action they're doing. And that matters because karma operates at the level of the action one is doing, and that's settled by intention. So if someone is just getting their stuff back, they're not trying to like retaliate at the ex, or they're not trying to reconcile with the ex. If they are trying to retaliate, they're trying to like attack them for one last time. They're becoming kind of mean and cruel, right? Like, and there will be consequences for that. The ex will be upset, or even further upset. They will become more callous, right? There will be consequences for trying to do the reconciliation, the retaliation. And karma just kind of specifies what those consequences will be. Again, it's not that this agent is coming and punishing you for being cruel towards your ex, but rather that in being cruel towards your ex, you become cruel, and then people don't like you as much. There are these moral consequences to doing bad things, and that depends upon the intention of the agent. So let's continue. So actions have effects in the world, and here are the kind of things I've been saying. So saying a cruel thing makes someone feel bad. So the feeling bad is the consequence or the effect of your action of being cruel, saying something cruel. And it's not that, that just is what happens, right? So you become cruel and they are hurt, and those are moral categories, but that's just how the world is arranged. On the other hand, feeding the poor makes them less hungry and happier, and the life being is improved. And that just is what happens, right? You act and the world changes. Karma governs that, but just in the cause and effect way, right? This is a very kind of a natural way of thinking about it. And all of this matters. From the Buddhist perspective, what matters more is what's happening within you. It says the way in which you're developing your personality, the way in which you're developing your character, the way in which you're forming your habits of thinking. So here's a cool quote. But there are also some inner effects on your mind, the way in which you frame yourself, and that's also governed by karma. When we act, we develop and reinforce mental and physical habits. Acting in certain ways shapes how we experience the world. After a while, a surgeon, for example, can start seeing patients as bags of organs and tumors instead of people. A lawyer can start to see a rowdy party as a collection of potential lawsuits. This is a deep point. This is an important point. If we start doing some things like the surgeon, in order for the surgeon to be more efficient, they stop noticing that the patient is a person. They just start thinking about the organs, the way in which the organs are organized, and the tumors, and the way in which the tumors relate to the rest of the body functions. If they kind of forget about the fact that there's a person there that has those organs, and they just relate to the organs, as time goes by, their very way of thinking, their outlook, their experience of what they're doing would ignore the fact that they're in front of people, right? They will start treating them as though they're not people at all. They'll start saying, cruel things or indifferent things, or they'll be kind of callous towards the suffering of the patients. The doctor would gradually start shaping their way of experiencing the world in that way. Or if you go back to the example of the ex that goes to, engage in one final fight. If they do that a lot, every time they break up, they start doing that, they will start seeing dates or people in general as in principle incapable of building loving relationships. They just are seeing people around them as it's hard to get along and have a loving relationship, and like it's all your fault, right? Like, there'll be this kind of like experience of people as incapable of loving each other. And then, of course, if you think that way and you're going to act that way, you're going to bring about to that. You're going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You will not be able to have a loving relationship because you see people that way. So the mental habits shape the way that you see the world, and then the way you act in the world, and then they reinforce themselves, and then you become a kind of person. From the Buddhist perspective, that's just cause and effect, right? That's just how the world works. This is how karma operates. And it's a moral category of karma, how karma operates, but not because someone is, making you do it, or there's a judge that is giving you rewards or punishment. That's just a description of the way the world is. And in seeing that, we kind of are empowered to, choose in different directions and build ourselves differently. Um, so again, go back to the big picture of the Buddhist. What matters for the Buddhist is not merely that we take control over the way we see the world, but that in taking control over the way we see the world, we find ourselves in a position to solve the problem of suffering. So more importantly, for the Buddhist, actions can reinforce mental habits that make it hard to fully realize that nature of the world. And remember, that is the source of the problem of suffering for the Buddhist. Suffering is the result of projecting onto the world things that are not there, distortive way of understanding the world, especially a distortive way that is grounded in a self-notion. Again, my example of someone who's vindictive towards her exes, it's a lot harder for that person to build loving relationships. So they end up suffering a lot more. And a lot of that has to do with their self-notion, the way in which they see the world. That person attacked me, so I'm going to go and attack them back, right? They see them, they experience the world as self-centered. And then it distorts things and ends up hurting themselves the most. So to do away with suffering, including the suffering of relationships, is to see the world no longer through that self-notion, no longer through that deceptive way of looking at the world. So karma in action. So we've been talking about this. Traditionally, karma is situated in the context of rebirth, that is the fuel that keeps the engine running. The cycle of rebirth and redeath keeps going because we act and produce certain effects. So the thought is, why is it that when we die, we reincarnate? This is the traditional picture. Oh, because when we acted in this world, we developed characters and habits, and that created that reinforced the sense of self. So the self is not, you are not ready to escape and reach enlightenment because you're still thinking that you exist in this distorted way. So you're still distortive, and your conception of the world is still distorted. You don't see the world the way the world is. You still think there's a real self. So the distortion endures. It's not until you see the way the world is that you have this enlightenment and you're able to escape the world of birth and rebirth. This is the traditional picture. And with that comes the idea that if you come to see the way the world truly is, you will no longer act. And that's a weird thing to say. So, but no longer act is not to sit around and like move, but it rather is not to act via self notions. So when you engage in the world, the thought is something like, you are in the zone. You see the world and everything around you as being intertwined, as interconnected. You see the emptiness and relational nature of everything around you. So when you act, you don't act from your self notion and your self perspective. You just act spontaneously in the moment in which you see that everything is one. So you don't delude yourself. You don't, distort what's in front of you. Just act as the world acts. So you're kind of in this unity and in tuneness with the world. Crucially, without the self-regarding distortion of the world. So you can act that way, but that's a purely spontaneous kind of act that is in some way no longer subject to the kind of consequences of karma, because you're no longer building the self. So that's the connection to living selflessly. Karma provides the rules that tell you how to get stuck in the world. They have to distort the world and continue on with suffering. But the opposite side of that is that it tells you the rules, but how to like attain enlightenment and escape suffering, do away with suffering. And the basic thought is to escape suffering, to solve the problem, is to live selflessly, to see the world the way that it is, and essentially to no longer through the notion of the self-distortive conception of the world. You act and live selflessly. That's the main point of Buddhism. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So central to Buddhist thinking is that internalizing the emptiness of all things brings with it an ethical shift. It helps you break out of the confines of the idea of the self and process, allowing you to live a life that is less isolated and more compassionate. And this is a crucial point. So if you think again in the West, the way that people in the West tend to think, should you be a good person? Should you act towards, benevolent towards others instead of being selfish? And the answer is, well, yes. But then you ask, why should you be selfless instead of selfish? And the answer is something like, oh, because there'll be a heaven afterwards in which you'll get rewarded, right? So there's this something external to the good acts that becomes the motivation for acting well. So why should you do the right thing? Well, because there'll be this reward, in the afterlife typically, but there will be this external thing that is a reward, and that's the motivation for you to do the right thing, to act selflessly. From the Buddhist perspective, that's alien. That feels strange. It's very different. Is this point about the ethical shift? The thought is you tend to be selfish because you give yourself this status that is kind of superior to others. You take care of yourself, perhaps your family, perhaps your nation. You have this like smaller group of people, maybe all the way up to yourself, that you think like counts more, right? You see the world through the self notion, and then you give it priority. You think the self is more important than the other. So that's why, promoting myself only. And the point of the Buddhist is that once you realize there's no such self, that we're all in this together, we're interconnected, then you realize, oh, I'm just making a basic mistake. I'm distorting the way the world is. When I see a neighbor and they get hurt and I rejoice in their pain, but then I get hurt and I, feel bad for my own pain. I'm making a very basic mistake. I'm assuming that the neighbor is in some sense less valuable than me or something like that. I'm seeing the world as though the neighbor doesn't really count. If you see the world as empty and interrelational, you realize those are just different kind of elements in the network of relations. There's nothing special about the pain being over there with a neighbor or being over here. So you cease to care more about your pain than other people's pain, because pain is bad everywhere. And that's the ethical shift, the recognition that we're all in this boat together. This recognition that pain is bad when I have it. Of course, I can experience it, but when other people have it, I can be compassionate, feel with them the pain. I can share the pain and realize that it's just as bad when it's over there. And when I realize that the pain is just as bad when it's over there as it is with me, that is a way of being selfless, right? It's a way of recognizing that what's bad is the pain, not that the pain is here versus over there. So it brings this ethical shift because now you see the way the world is. You're not the center of the world. So see this, that the ethical shift. Think back to where we began. We started with a problem, but it was your problem. It was how to fix the subtle buzz of dissatisfaction that rings in your ears. But seeing that the self is empty and relational expands the boundaries of the problem. It changes from a problem essentially about you and your life to a problem for everyone, a feature of the world, a problem for every created being with experience. And a good way of bringing this out is by this by what Buddhists call the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is a kind of figure. It is someone who works towards helping others better see reality and live in accordance with it. But bodhisattvas already know that they have this kind of enlightenment experience in which they see the world as it is, so they live selflessly. Most of us, the struggle is to attain that status of enlightenment in which we come to see the world as it truly is, I mean, not through the self-image. Bodhisattvas are beings that have attained this status. They already see the way the world is. And their goal is to promote the well-being of others. Their goal is to help others so that they, all others, can solve the problem of suffering. Here are some more characteristics of the bodhisattva. So even though bodhisattvas are still in the cycle of rebirth, that is, they're still with us, they're the neighbors and things like that, they're completely clear-eyed. They're no longer distorting the way the world is. They fully understand reality as it is. So there's someone like a firefighter that goes into the burning fire to get people out. It's not that the firefighter is foolish that they don't realize there's a fire there. No, no, they're fully aware of the dangers. That's why they have kind of volunteered to go and help those that are inside. Um, so they're not someone oblivious to how bad the fire is. They're staying in the burning building to help others escape, knowing full well what's going on, right? That's the good firefighter. They're there to help, not because they don't realize the building is burning, but precisely because they realize it's burning, that they want others to escape the pain. So more general and modern understanding of the Bodhisattva is simply as someone who sees the nature of the world clearly, particularly emptiness. If you come to understand the world and kind of see the world, change your perspective and see the interconnectedness of everything else, that is your selfish desires, your selfish self-concern will just dissipate, will disappear. You'll realize how inadequate it is, how your concern for yourself is grounded in a distortion of the way the world is. A bodhisattva is someone who has done that not only understands the thought, oh, we're all in this together, but kind of like sees the world that way, responds naturally to the world that way. And now they start working for the benefit of everyone else. In fact, one of the stories of bodhisattvas are people who can escape now. They can just walk out of the cycle of birth and rebirth and be enlightened, but they choose to stay until everyone else has made it out, right? So there's this kind of a very self-committed person who's not going to attain the ultimate kind of goal of Buddhism, enlightenment, in staying, escape the cycle of birth and rebirth until everyone else has done it. So they have this kind of heroic, firefighter figure in the context of trying to save the problem of solve the problem of suffering. Here's another way of trying to bring this out. So compassion is not about making suffering for others. You might think, oh, someone's compassionate when they're willing to sacrifice for others. But rather it's about changing your outlook, your perspective, the way you see the world, so that you don't even experience helping others as a sacrifice, right? Suppose that you have a burger and there's a homeless in front of you who also needs a burger. You might think, well, I need to be a good person, so I'm gonna give them my burger. But you might think like, oh, it's my burger, I'm not gonna eat it anymore. And that it feels like a sacrifice. It feels like giving up on something good for someone else. And the true bodhisattva, the true person that has compassion doesn't think that way. They think, well, there's hunger here, there's hunger there, the hunger is greater there, so the burger will be kind of attain more good by being consumed there. So they gladly give the burger to the other person without any sense of like, I'm losing it, right? To the extent that you're thinking, I'm losing it, you're still too kind of distorting the world through your self-image. You're still too self-absorbed. And the bodhisattva is no longer that. They just hand the burger because the homeless is more hungry. And they think, yeah, that's where I should go, with no sense of they're losing anything, but rather the burger is best, employed in this context. The final topic I want to talk is this idea that with being compassionate and selfless, there's this kind of freedom that happens. There's kind of liberation that occurs. And it has to do with identity, the way we look at the world. We think of ourselves in terms of all sorts of identities. I'm a singer, I'm a player, I'm a philosopher. And then Bodhisattva points out, Buddhists point out, sometimes those identities are part of the problem. They're part of the distortion. So why? Well, here's some considerations. Part of what maintaining an identity means is that it's never enough just to do something, the kinds of things that people with those activities do. For example, well, you have to be, if you maintain an identity, you have to be a certain type of person. So for example, it is not enough just to sing and enjoy singing. You have to be a singer, right? Like there's this extra layer of commitment to being a kind of person. And so far, this is unproblematic. If you start thinking about it more, maintaining an identity can bring attachments and problems with when the identity is threatened. Here's some observations. So seeing the empty nature of these identities, being a singer, for example, allows for this liberation, for this freedom. Now you can just sing without taking seriously all the baggage that goes along with maintaining and defending your identity as a singer. What are some of those baggages? Well, like now, when you hear someone else sing, you don't have to feel threatened. Oh, is that a better singer than me? And now your self-identity is threatened and challenged. So you might like not enjoy the singing because now you're thinking, oh, I need to practice a lot more to beat them, right? Notice that that threat to the identity is distorting the experience of the moment. You're no longer appreciating the singing because you're thinking, oh, the person might be better than me. And they don't have to be better, right? If they're worse, you might be thinking, oh, look at me, I'm so much better than that person. Did that, right? Instead of actually enjoying and appreciating and experiencing what's before you, you're still like self-deluding yourself, thinking about yourself, distorting things as though the singing is about you. The singing is not about you, it's someone else singing. So, and those kinds of baggage just come along with wanting to hold on to an identity, to defining yourself in this kind of identity way. You want to be a singer. But if you realize being a singer actually just is the kind of the empty interrelational way of being in the world, then you'll be freed. You cannot actually have an identity as an enduring intrinsic part of who you are. You can sing, you can listen to other people sing, you can do all sorts of things, but there is nothing over and above those things that is being a singer. Once you see that, you can just sit down and like enjoy someone else singing because they're just singing too. They're not really like singers in this substantive sense that might challenge your identity. There's just activities in the world that are in constant flux. You can just see them as they are and enjoy them as they are. So, different way of saying the same thing is something like being less invested in certain identities can also help you make changes in your life by making it easier to face up to the badness in yourself and others. um, you can now appreciate what's happening before you, and you don't have to be kind of deluding yourself into thinking you're better than you are so your self-image can be maintained. You can now actually assess whether or not you have deficiencies. For example, you might have grown up in a family in which everyone's singer and you just grew up with this dream of being a singer, but never really stop to think about how much you actually care about it, how much you actually enjoy singing. You might be so invested in the identity of being a singer without actually thinking about or realizing the extent to which it makes your life happy. But if you're not as invested in the identity, you can actually identify some problems. For example, you might not be happy with that 10 years down the line, and you can see it now, and you can structure your life differently. Or if you're very committed to your national identity, you might just be blind to some of the bad things that are happening around your nation or within your nation because you're so committed to your nation that you don't look at them. So, strangely enough, your commitment to your nation becomes an obstacle for your very ability to promote the well being of the nation by becoming an obstacle to your seeing the bad parts of the nation. And it's your self notion, your self identity that is doing the problem. If you drop that and just start looking around, you actually be a much better person that promotes the well being of your nation. That's a good Buddhist observation. uh, you're free to actually do the things better. Okay, let's end here. I'll see you next time.